Thanks, Honorog. As he said, Reed Duke, Jarvis, you here. We brought you the tail end of yesterday's stream, and then we're gonna cover every single minute of today's tournament. Jarvis, how you feeling?
Good. Feeling great. I actually woke up early this morning to get into the mood by watching the European Championship, and I'm excited to watch more Magic here today.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll be asking you about what you took away from that event in Europe, but for now we have Magic on our screen, so let's get right to the match. Um, Joseph Puglisi with five color creativity leading the standings, the only undefeated player. I'll give you just a quick by the numbers update. We had 56 players making the cut for day two, and 14 of them have a record of 7-1 or better. So Joseph doing great with the 8-0 record, and then Gabriel definitely no slouch either. Is exactly the position you want to be at this stage in the tournament. Izzet Murktide with the great opening on the play. And what do you think Joseph needs to do to stabilize the situation, Jarvis?
Yeah, it's always difficult versus in Murktide, especially when you're in the draw and they have a one drop, two drop, and it doesn't appear that Joseph has a lightning bolt in hand. Otherwise, I think you would have seen a bolt on the trigger immediately. What I think Joseph is looking to do is try to resolve a Teferi Time Raveler, probably the most important card, which will clear the way for his combo later. But in the face of all of the creatures, I'm not even sure how effective Teferi will even be.
Yeah, is the combo gonna get him out of this? Like, let's say he just goes nothing, 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 Dwarven Mine, and creativity for an Archon. Is that good enough? Not even getting into the question of whether or not Gabriel has a counterspell, but is that like a winning situation for Joseph?
So the actual problem with that, as you alluded to, is that might not be good enough because Unholy Heat does conveniently do 6 damage to an Archon of Cruelty.
Okay, so you could just take your medicine, three
Yeah.
three for one or four for one even, and fight through an Archon hypothetically.
Yeah, it depends on the precise situation. If the Murktide player is far enough ahead, it might be possible to just kill through it within a turn or two. Um, I think it starts to get dicey once you get to two Archons entering play.
Yeah, I think that's right. Having played against this deck a lot, it's like one Archon, you don't want to
Mhm.
see it, but maybe you're still in the game. But if it's two or more, you're pretty buried. Though I will say we saw one game on stream yesterday. I think it was Joseph himself put three Archon of Cruelty onto the battlefield against Merfolk, and like what was conceivable that he could have still lost the game. He did wind up winning, but
Mhm.
the Merfolk deck was pretty admirable in being able to fight past the Archons with all the island walk. We do have a Merfolk player at 7-1, so um, we'll get to see potentially that deck again today.
Yeah. Gav has a lot of creatures out, which is, I mean, they're good for closing the game, but at some point you'll draw too many creatures and not enough interaction. We'll see what actually ends up happening. If Gav has his counterspell behind, I think this is a very good situation for him.
Yeah, almost any spell, frankly. Like if you're able to
Mm.
start surveilling and conniving and get delirium and attack for as much as 9 damage here, it's going to be a great turn. But I know what you're saying. It is possible that you
Mm.
just draw a hand with mostly lands and creatures and can't really leverage the Dragon's Rage channelers the way you would like.
Yeah, agree with you. It looks like this is an upkeep on Holy Heat.
Okay, so that's to try to fix the draw step, looking for a second spell, digging, as you mentioned, for a counter spell, since next turn is really going to be the key turn of the game.
Yeah, kind of interesting. I think game one is actually fairly even, and the post-board games are sort of decided by whether creativity can resolve a Veil of Summer, an absolutely brutal card versus the Izzet Murktide deck.
Okay. And is there any counterplay from the Murktide side? Like, what do you have to do to beat a good hand with Veil of Summer?
Cast Blood Moon.
All right. Well, that is a good answer to Veil of Summer for a number of reasons.
I think the reality is there's a lot of room to maneuver on both sides, so it's kind of hard to say who exactly is favored. Just a lot of room for maneuvering from both sides is how I would actually put it. It's a schematic, old border schematic Mishra's bottle from the Brothers' War. So it looks like it's going to be attack for 9, which puts Joseph to the test the very next turn, you know?
Yeah, but Gabriel did tap out, so if Joseph has Indomitable Creativity or Transmogrify in tandem with Dwarven Mine, and he has fetch lands to increase his chances. He has Chapter 2 of Fabled Mirror Breaker to increase his chances. He's still in the game. One Archon looks good on the board, not a guaranteed win, of course, as we mentioned, but just putting a big blocker on the battlefield, gaining 3 life, and removing a creature, that's very, very powerful.
So it looks like Gab's taking his time trying to decide on Surveils, I think. Or not. I wasn't sure what was going on there. But, 9 damage is a lot.
Okay, big moment. This turn is gonna basically determine the course of the game.
Joseph does have basically 3 draw steps this turn because of Fail of the Mirror Breaker's trigger. A lot of looks for the creativity if necessary.
Yeah, chat points out in all of that surveilling and conniving, a spell pierce the bin. It's always hard to keep track of and notice if Gabriel might have had access to drawing that spell pierce at a point where he still had mana available.
So I think the issue was it was Unholy Heat, Surveil twice, one got binned, one left on top, then Iteration binned the spell pierce.
Because at that point he already didn't have enough mana.
Correct. I think if Gab had an untapped land there, he would never bin the spell pierce there, of course. Well, here we go. 1 Archon Cruelty versus, I guess now 2 3-power fires puts Joseph to 9. So I guess if Gab has Unholy Heat plus Lightning Bolt, it's still lethal. Kind of crazy to think about, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this game is this is what needed to happen for Joseph to stay in the game, and Gabriel has some counterplay, and this is definitely how it needs to start, right? Now having some looks for a Lightning Bolt. Ooh, Ragavan. Ragavan actually could have been lethal if you can connive a spell, but this is a much easier way to do it. And wow, that's Izzet Murktide beating Archon of Cruelty.
Well, so the called shot Unholy Heat plus Lightning Bolt on the following turn, kind of crazy to see, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of we saw all of that card selection, all of that digging, and the one thing you could look for there is a counter spell to make sure the Archon never hits the battlefield in the first place. The other thing you could look for is a way to come back after the Archon hits the battlefield, and given the mana situation, that seemed to be the approach that Gabriel was able to take. Answering the Archon, clearing the way, and then Lightning Bolt to finish the job before Joseph gets another turn or ever gets an opportunity to try to creativity for more than one.
Oh, I love this. He's using the deck thing to cover up what he's sideboarding, but also double checking his sideboard notes at the same time.
Yeah, sounds good.
It reminds me of the D&D, Dungeon Master.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the cover, right? But it looks like Destroy Evil, Flusterstorm, and Veil of Summer are coming in.
Jarvis, we have a question in the chat about the card Blood Moon, which you mentioned as a major player after sideboarding here. Can you walk us through the most important roles of Blood Moon in this matchup?
Yeah. So the way the creativity's mana base is built, basically every land is a mountain. So you don't have room for like basic forest or basic plains. So once a Blood Moon is out, basically the only cards that Joseph can cast are like Fable of the Mirror Breakers and I guess Indomitable Creativity targeting Fable tokens and the like. So it locks out Joseph from a lot of his spells, but not all of them. So he can still cast Lightning Bolt, he can still cast Fable. I have seen versions of Creativity that side into Fury, which is kind of an interesting thought to think about because you don't know if you're going to get Fury or Archon Cruelty, but I don't think that's the case for Joseph here.
Yeah, that's always interesting. And I did happen to notice that Joseph has a couple of alternative targets, including an Elish Norn, Mother of Machines.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that's interesting for the creativity deck is how excited are you to hit one of these cards if you creativity for one? If you're creativity for
Mm-hmm.
more than one and you hit Elish Norn plus Archon, fine. You know, we all know that's good enough
Sure.
to win.
Yeah.
But if you just hit the one, the one Fury, the one Elish
Mm-hmm.
Norn, the one Iona that we talk about sideboarding in, how strong is that? I think you want to run through that test with every
Mm-hmm.
alternative creature that you're considering when you build your creativity deck.
I think in the Izzet Murktide matchup, Elshorn, the best thing about Elshorn is that it has 7 toughness. So my instinct is it probably doesn't come in. I'm not sure about Iona. That one's a little bit closer. You can do something like name red or blue, but I think there's just a lot of times where you spend a lot of time jockeying for position to step an Iona, but then they have an 8/8 Murktide region, and it's kind of well,
Yeah.
that's not exactly what you want to have happen, right?
Yeah, the world we live in where like your reanimator target that you cheated into play just loses to the 2 mana creature out of Izzet Murktide. But the other thing is there's no special reason I don't think why you would need to diversify your
Mhm.
creatures. That would be more for a matchup where they might have Necromentia or Stonebrain, or where the Archon for some reason isn't good enough. But I just think Archon is good enough in this matchup.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about going to an alternative target is if it's open deck list and you're playing against a Murktide opponent that has 3+ Orvars in their sideboard, I would consider running the switcheroo because it's kind of scary to do that sort of thing in the face of that.
Cool. So talk to me about Orvar. Is this a card that you bring when you play Modern?
Uh, I have played it in the RCQs I've played recently, but mostly because I had Eldari's Call in my deck. I don't generally like to play it as a one of otherwise, but it is sort of a good card to draw versus Archon Cruelty. Uh, it's very annoying to beat that card, and it's not beatable by one Archon. I think you generally need 2 Archons to beat an Orvar, which poses a lot of problems again.
Yeah, I've even seen, if they put 2 Archons onto the battlefield, the first trigger resolves and you discard whatever your other card is in hand. The second
Mm.
trigger resolves. Now you discard the Orvar, copy Archon, make them
Mhm.
sack an Archon, then you untap and get the first attack. So Orvar is, yeah. When we get into the realm of like, creativity for 3 or more,
Yeah.
you're done for. But in a low resource game, if you can actually nab an Archon trigger with an Orvar, that's the dream.
Well, one weird thing that can happen is you can actually veil the Orvar ability copying your Archon. So that's another reason that Veil of Summer is kind of important in a lot of these matchups.
Okay, so you can imagine a world where it's like creativity, counterspell, Veil of Summer, and then at that point the Orvar is not even good enough anyway.
Um, I would ask a judge if Veil affects creatures that aren't in play yet. I don't exactly remember the wording. Okay,
It would,
I guess it would, yeah. Okay.
yeah, you would be unable to target your opponent
Right.
with the Archon trigger. Well, we went pretty
Well,
deep down the rabbit hole here, but I can
yeah,
actually tell you that Gabriel does not have access to Orvar, so we're not going to see that
yes.
pattern in this match. But I think that's probably something that Joseph has faced a lot,
Mhm.
either in his tournament or his preparation beforehand. Who knows? Maybe we'll even see it later in the day. Here's
Looks like
Gabriel keeping 6 cards and deciding what
mhm.
to put on the bottom.
Looked like Archmage's Charm, which makes sense because it looks like Gabriel only has one land in hand. These two guys look like they're having a lot of fun. They're very happy. I guess when you're at the top tables, it's easier to be happier, right?
Yeah, these guys are in great shape. We have 5 more rounds today, and before I cut to the top 8, we don't know exactly what record you're going to need to make that top 8 cut, but suffice to say that 8-0 or 7-1 is just where you want to be right now.
Looks like a pair of Sparbuff Canals for Gabriel. Let's see, what else was in Gabriel's song? There's an iteration, but it's a hard sell to tap out for it on turn 2 because it's hard to get anything out of it. There's a counterspell and a he's shuffling the cards out. Counterspell, iteration, counterspell, bolt, unholy heat, I think. So it looks like 2 triumphs for Joseph. Just getting our mana underneath ourselves so we can cast a Leyline Binding for 1 if necessary.
Gabriel, I caught a glimpse of his hand. He's got an interesting dilemma here with multiple counter spells. It's exactly what
Mhm.
you want, but no additional land. So he's going to have
Right.
to probably pick his spot of when to tap out for that expressive iteration to keep the
Mhm.
you know keep the gas flowing. But he would love to use a counter spell here on a Fable
Ooh.
or a Teferi just
Yeah.
to basically use your
Mhm.
mana and not get bottlenecked.
Well, fortunately for Gabriel, he drew land. Makes the decision a lot easier, I think.
Notably, Joseph fetched a basic plains there. That's of course going to be a concession to the threat of Blood Moon, but it does mean
Mhm.
he's 1 land behind schedule when it comes to Dwarven Mine. So
Yep.
Gabriel knows that there can't be indomitable creativity this turn.
Yeah, the basic planes is an interesting one. I believe Daryl Ayers came up with it first. It's a very weird one to look at to have in the sideboard of a creativity deck. But once you're deciding in Destroy Evils, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, the important thing is having a concerted plan for how you're
Mhm.
going to approach a Blood Moon matchup. So if you say, well, my answer to Blood Moon is a white card, so all I have to do is fetch a basic plains and then I'm pretty well
Mhm.
insulated. That is, a functional, coherent strategy.
Looks like a third triumph. Looks like Jetmir, Xander's Lounge, and Rogren Triumph have been
Did
fetched.
you study up overnight, Jarvis? I have to say that was the most difficult part of our job yesterday was identifying the various lands in these 5 color mana bases.
Did I study up overnight? I would say I did not, but there's only 3 triumphs in the deck, so I
Okay,
feel pretty confident that those are the 3.
use an alternative strategy then.
Yeah, it was just process of elimination rather than knowing what triumphs they actually are.
I was dreaming of Rogrin triomes, tossing and turning in bed.
Not Zeatori's Proving Ground.
Well, that's what I dream about every other night.
Oh, fair enough. Wow, that's the third counterspell from Gabriel.
Yeah, looking good. And has not been met by Veil of Summer yet. You said that was a card that we're going to keep an eye on for the post sideboard games.
Yeah, I mean, the minute your counterspell gets veiled, it's like you kind of just want to leave the game. I will say I have gotten a non-zero number of Dovin's Veto Veiled of Summered, and it makes me upset every time.
Yeah.
So the only thing I think Gab is missing is a way to close this game out.
Right, yeah, 3 counter spells is all fine and good. That's one of your best cards in the matchup, but you
Okay.
need to have the counter spells and a way to pull ahead with the additional time that you've bought. You can't
Well,
just sit there forever. But here's a good one.
yeah, it's a 2 mana 7/7. Definitely, that'll end the game real fast if it's not killed.
You'll note Joseph keeping the fetch land uncracked, may want
Mhm.
access to a Dwarven Mine, may want to respond to another Blood Moon.
You know what I'm rooting for? Desperation and download creativity targeting an Murktide Regent.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's happened before. Though with access to the Dwarven Mine, I would be surprised if he took that
Mhm.
line. You know, you might do it
Yep.
if you had a really strong read of your opponent having a lightning bolt in hand. All right, Leyline Binding answers the Murktide Regent when Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, and Prismatic Ending would have been unable to do so. So,
Mhm.
of sigh of relief for Joseph.
Yeah, so it looks like we just have a handful of answers for Gabriel. And this can turn out to be a problem if basically it's not difficult to imagine a situation where Joseph just starts fetching Dwarven Mines and starts attacking to sort of, become the beatdown in a weird sort of way.
What's this engineered explosives doing?
It's covering all of the tokens, so it's kind of hard to resolve Indomitable Creativity or Transmogrify through a EE on 0.
Interesting spot there. So Gabriel bobbled Joseph. I was lucky
Mm.
enough to catch a glimpse that it was an indomitable creativity, which now Gabriel knows about, but Joseph doesn't, and Joseph decided to shuffle it away. Unclear even if creativity is an ideal draw at this point because of well the engineer explosive, because of all that open mana.
Mhm.
We might be more in the realm of like Joseph wanting to start hard casting expensive cards or setting up a threat with a Veil of Summer backup.
Yeah, I think if what so basically here's the thought process from Joseph's side. 3 counterspells are gone. How many hard counters does Gabriel actually have left for the card Archon and Cruelty itself? The answer is it can't be that many.
Yeah, it can't be that many. So who does this waiting game favor? You know, it seems like Gabriel is safe against the combo player, but it's unclear if this is actually leading towards a win. What do you think?
I think Joseph is favored, and I just think it's because he has more top end stuff in his deck that will sort of it won't necessarily one shot Gabriel like his combo cards would, but I don't know how many Archon triggers you can realistically hope to tank before you really can't do anything productive in the game.
Question in chat: can you beat the EE by having 2 fetch lands up for 2 Dwarven Mines? The answer is no, because Indomitable Creativity and
Mhm.
Transmogrify have to target
Yep.
a token, and if that target is removed, the spell will not resolve.
It looks like Joseph discarded 2 lands to draw 2 more cards. Or what was the other one? The second card might not have been a land. Oh, it looks like he discarded Spell Pierce because it's kind of useless for him as well. Yeah, I've seen this situation happen before in post-board games of creativity versus like elementals, where the creative player also doesn't want to move, and then I've seen the elementals player just die to hardcast archons.
Yeah, Joseph won a game yesterday where his creativities were removed with Necromentia,
Mhm.
and he just played, Planeswalker Fable Control and won
Yes.
pretty handily. So this creativity deck is not one dimensional. It's not like you draw your sideboard card and you're all set. You have to really fight
Mhm.
them on a lot of fronts all at the same time.
Yeah, I think really the beneficiary of the creativity deck. Well, the reason it's so good is most of the cards it plays are just very good cards, like Fairy Time Raveler, Ren and Six, good removal spells, and you can pivot to a different plan post board if you want to.
I'm actually very wary of sideboarding into too reactive of a configuration when I
Mhm.
face creativity. So
Right.
these cards like Engineered Explosives, it's nice when you frame it like, oh, an Engineered Explosives with two
Mhm.
mana open protects me from their combo. But in practice, I'm afraid of getting into a game like this
Mhm.
against creativity where I just can't get them dead and have to really fight through every single threat that they wind up drawing.
Definitely agree with you. I don't know precisely how Gabriel sideboarded. Um, it's possible that he only shaved like two threats, and he's just sort of floating out on reactive cards.
Yeah, the tricky thing is that the creativity deck has a ton of removal, right? Leyline
Mhm.
Binding, Lightning Bolt,
Yep.
sometimes Unholy Heat, Prismatic Ending. So you need to draw like multiple threats and sometimes protect them.
So it looks like Joseph has drawn a Veil of Summer.
And this most recent draw step was Archon of Cruelty, so he's either going to go for something
Um,
or set up something.
so we have 8 mana right now. If we wait one more turn, we could theoretically cast an Archon with Veil backup, which I think that might be a little bit much for Gabriel to deal with unless he has actual two counter spells.
Yeah, the one thing, Jarvis, is you mentioned hard counters that are able to deal with the
Mhm.
Archon. But if you're setting up Archon plus Veil,
Sure.
you tap out for it, that turns back on stuff like Spell Pierce, Flusterstorm, whatever it might be
Right.
to win the counter battle.
Ooh, but Blood Moon
Oof.
is going to make it hard to cast Archon plus Veil backup.
Yeah, not a moment too soon with this Blood Moon. If he had waited, this thing it might have been too late.
Definitely agree with fetching with the Dwarven mines now. I think like conceivably a way you could beat the Blood Moon is to just make both of the dwarves and attack Gabriel 8 times, you know? I wonder if there was a window for just to fetch for the dwarves earlier after we removed the E to just try to get Gabriel out of position even sooner. Some good old fashioned draw go, draw go, draw go, because that's what Blood Moon does to a game sometimes.
Yeah, most definitely. Whose position do you like here?
Uh so I actually doubt that Gabriel is going to die to these dwarves because he does have a bunch of bolts and unholy heats. He's just hoping for a better target. But at the same time, like this is the problem. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is just so good here. We're gonna use unholy heat to take out a dwarf.
Yeah, looks like Gabriel was patient on that Archmage's Charm. That card, almost every time it's drawn, there's some interesting decisions to be made with it, and I may have been tempted at various points to cash it in for two cards, find some
Mm-hmm.
action. But here we have Ragavan being dashed, met by a burn spell, and Gabriel gonna not fight over that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is the major problem with Veil of Summer in the matchup, specifically versus Blood Moon. It's kind of a strategic mismatch. We have two Footage Strands, Spell Pierce, and Unholy Heat. I suppose the reason to hold those is if you draw a Ledger Shredder, then you can sort of try to connive them away.
Okay. Also, some bluff value. I mean, it's hard to imagine like what Joseph would decide not to cast if into this open mana. But for an example, he had 8 mana the turn before this Blood Moon came down and chose not to cast Archon.
Mhm.
I would have, I would have made the same decision for sure, waiting for a
Right.
ninth land to back it up with Veil of Summer. But just goes to show you how the players operating in the face of hidden information changes the dynamics of the game.
Oh, wait, the second Archmage's Charm, Gabriel did cash it in for 2 cards.
Makes sense.
Then iteration finding Fiery Islet and Unknown card.
This has been a wild game. I thought Joseph was just gonna win the slow and patient route by hard casting
Mhm.
Archon, but the Blood Moon has totally changed the dynamics, and now it makes me wonder: did Joseph board in those answers like destroy evil that you mentioned earlier?
Well, under the the cover I referred to, the Flusterstorms and the Veils were put there. So I think they were, or Flusterstorms, Veils, and Destroy Evils were put there. Rather, is what I mean to say.
Okay,
So
could
I mean, it's just been a long game, and he hasn't drawn one yet, right?
yeah, he could also pick up one of the main deck Leyline Bindings that could potentially do the trick as well. But his time is running thin as Gabriel now has a threat and a ton of card selection with the Ledger Shredder and the expressive iterations. Also, you said it, Jarvis, holding on to those flooded strands for connive value later has been
Mhm.
a really sharp approach for Gabriel to take.
Also,
That
like this, he's taking one turn off to just leave all the shields down, and then he's probably just never going to tap out again, if I had to guess.
So if Joseph had to destroy evil here, he could free up his mana from the Blood Moon and make a powerful play.
Mhm.
He might even have enough fetch lands available that if he's to draw the destroy evil, he can kill the Blood Moon, get some dwarves, and
Uh-oh.
cast creativity.
Uh, what do you think that is?
Wow, but I do want to add that this frees up Gabriel's blue mana, so the coast
Yeah,
is not as clear as it would have otherwise been. And you see Joseph sitting up in his chair. He's like, okay, this game got interesting again. He also has to, hey, he's got to consider how many fetchable lands are left in the deck. I think he's got enough, but this
they're
has been a
very
very
painful.
long game.
They're very painful fetches, I think, because uh, well, I guess you could get Mountain, but I don't think the Blood Crypt has been fetched yet, so that's a fetch shock. And the other problem is if you do this, you don't get the Veil of Summer backup, right?
You mean if he taps 8 mana for Archon?
Yeah. Oh, maybe there is a Blood Crypt there, and I just don't see it. Oh, you know what this is more likely? It's more likely to be a creativity plus Veil.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about now. You have to think about burn spells for your dwarves. You have to think about spell pierce, flusterstorm, counter spell, archmage's charm, and let's see what Joseph decides on. It's gonna be creativity for 2.
Connive Trigger.
Love Gabriel's pacing here. He's not gonna make a snap decision. He's gonna resolve his trigger, take his time.
So there's one Unholy Heat, and I think I saw a Spell Pierce, but that doesn't do much in the face of 3 lands and tap. Huh. So lead with Spell Pierce. So Joseph is going for the Veil. And we're rearranging the stack. I'll love to see it.
Yeah, cool play from Joseph here because if the veil resolves, he's all set. If Gabriel points another spell pierce at either card, Joseph can pay. If Gabriel counterspells the Veil, then Joseph can pay for the Spell Pierce that's on the stack. But Gabriel needs Counterspell or Flusterstorm, and he needs to just target the original creativity. Is the way I see this.
Yep. So it looks like Gabriel has Unholy Heat and actually the fourth counterspell, right?
Yeah, so he needs to just counterspell the creativity directly. Joseph will still get to draw a card off of the Veil, and he has the potential to just have another
Oh,
answer here.
but there is a spell pierce, so we're going to see two Archons enter the battlefield, and I have to say I think that's probably going to be good enough here.
Joseph has to make sure he has enough Archons remaining in his library.
True, he could have drawn one off the Veil, and if there's another one in hand, that's not great for him. Correct?
Yeah.
Oh,
What a cool turn, Jarvis.
yeah.
We went from having basically like no relevant mana available to destroy your Blood Moon, produce 2 tokens, cast creativity, protect it with multiple counter spells.
Yeah, I mean, Veil of Summer was brutal enough that game.
Something ironic about starting with a destroy evil and then ending the turn with two demons on the battlefield.
Well, wait, are they demons? I thought they're just Archons.
All right.
Look, I saw you play in some Baneslayer Angels. Baneslayer Angel does not have protection from Archon Cruelty.
That's actually good to know. I predict that will come up at some point in my Magic career.
Really? I don't think it will, because I think the Archon's just going to eat your Baneslayer every time. Alright, so Gabriel actually has a way to at least block the Archon Cruelty getting to sacrifice the Ragman, assuming creatures don't die, but it looks like creatures are about to die.
Yeah, the problem here is that Joseph just drew 3 cards after winning that counter battle. So now Gabriel's in the situation where he's trying to scramble to deal with what's on the board, but Joseph has now freed up all his mana and drawn a whole fresh hand of cards. So I think Joseph is on track to win this game, whether it happens quickly or slowly. And looks like we're going to go for quickly.
Yeah, so Ren 6 took out the Ragman, which means the Archon Cruelty can clear the second Murktide.
All right, so that was a roller coaster of a game. It looked even, then it looked good for Joseph, then it looked good for Gabriel, and then finally it's destroy evil on the probably the last turn that it could have come off the top.
I agree with you.
Yeah, great game for sure.
Yeah, I think Gabriel might decide to put the DRCs back from his sideboard back into the deck.
Yeah, I would. Especially with the opponent bringing in Veil of Summer. My approach would be like, I want to put on a quick clock and have one well-placed disruptive element. That's more like how he won game 1. It was just on the back of the quick uncontested clock, and not so much on the I'm going to try to sit back and counter everything plan.
And in fact, Gabriel in game 1 tanked an Archon hit and killed his opponent basically the next turn. So just think about that.
Yep.
All right, I have to ask you sort of a lighthearted question. Would you play Snow Island or regular Island? And Izzet Murktide?
That's a great question, because the spike in me who wants to get every advantage would be like, oh, well, someone's going to have Redain and my land's going to enter the battlefield tapped. But the collector in me loves a good Ice Age snow-covered island. So to be honest with you, it would probably just be determined by what lands I had on me, or if I already had a deck sleeved up with a certain island in it.
So my answer would actually be reversed. The spike in me would make me play Snow Islands because of Ice Fan collateral, but I would probably prefer to use APAC Hong Kong Islands.
So you mean like on turn one when you play Snow Covered Island, you want your opponent to not be sure what
No,
deck you're playing?
no. It's if you Ragavan in Ice Coatl or like an On Thin
Holy cow,
Ice.
Jarvis, we're going deep here. If you Ragavan and Ice Fang Coatl, you want it to have Death Touch. I'm willing to bet that that's not going to come up. That's not going to change the outcome of the game.
I will say that Edgar showed me a screenshot where he had non-snow lands and there was an Ice Fang out and his opponent was attacking him with a Tarmogoyf.
Wow. All right.
Anyways, joking aside, it does look like Gabriel's hand is a lot better this game. I think I saw a Shredder and a Blood Moon. It's Meteor Storm Stomping Ground. Did you catch if Joseph had a Ren 6 in hand? I think he probably does if he's fetching.
Yeah, it's one of the few things I think that you would fetch on your main phase for, especially given that. But he's fetching basic planes that can't cast
Oh,
Ren and six. I think my only explanation for that is that Joseph probably changed his course
yeah,
midstream. Like he thought he was going to play a Ren, but then decided that Blood Moon was too big of a threat. And that does happen sometimes.
yep. Oh, I think this is not the best iteration because we hit two 2-mana spells, a Spell Pierce. Well, sorry. I referred to Murktide Regent as the 2-mana spell, which it clearly isn't here, but we hit Murktide Regent, Expressive Iteration, and Spell Pierce, which is not the ideal iteration. Okay, it looks like this turn he's going for the run. Yeah, so
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I generally like the approach that Joseph has seemed to try to take or tried to take last game of just leaving fetch lands uncracked and
Mhm.
sort of being able to react to whatever need arises. But certainly, it seems that fetching the basic planes early is a big part of the plan against a Blood Moon deck.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. Although here it was a little bit more awkward because it was met by Spell Pierce.
So now, perfect opportunity for Gabriel to resolve a threat. And notably, this is the basic planes shutting off or putting Dwarven Mine one turn behind schedule. So there is nothing that Joseph can do to win the game
Um,
immediately.
you mean like that tapped Blood Dwarven Mine?
Exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
So the basic planes comes at a tremendous cost here. It comes at a cost to Dwarven Mine, comes at a cost of being able to double spell, comes at a cost of being able to protect your stuff with Veil of Summer. So once again, a case of the mere threat of Blood Moon having a big impact on the game.
I mean, it is funny. I think Gabriel does have the Blood Moon hand, so the planes might dissuade him from doing that for a while. Or at least waiting for a situation where he can protect the Blood Moon with, like, Counterspell. Mishra's Ball was definitely a good hit off of Iteration, though. Ooh, he left that one on top pretty quickly. Nope, he changed his mind. All right, so what is in Joseph's hand? Oh, that's not great.
So another tapped land.
I think there are two Archons, a Leyline Binding.
Oh yeah,
Two
that's a That's a pretty miserable hand.
Yeah, it turns out there's a real cost to putting Archon of Cruelty in your deck.
And it's sort of like a double in that, you have these bricks in your hand and your creativities are weaker.
Mhm.
Assuming Joseph has not changed from his main deck configuration, he only has one Archon left in his library, which means can't creativity for two right off the bat, and then also he's at risk of just drawing the third Archon and being out of luck.
Really could use a Fire Prophecy about now. That's what I would say. Probably not in Joseph's deck. That card's a little bit too weak for the modern format, if I had to guess. But yeah, this DRC is doing good work.
Yeah, so notably this time Gabriel took a different approach and decided to use his counters to fight over his threat.
Hmm. Hmm. So a little bit of information I think is given away. It's pretty unlikely that Gab has counterspell or Gabriel has counterspell in hand, because otherwise you would just tap both non-basic lands, right?
Yep, and even more specifically, probably has a red instant that he wants
Right.
access to. This is a main phase.
Uh, is that overpaid? So there are two land types, right? So it
Yes,
should
so
cost
he
four.
or Joseph should have one mana floating.
Yeah, there's supposed to be there's probably a red floating. Not a big deal, I think, on that turn, but I think it would have been a sort of a weird situation if Gabriel had spell pierce and like spell pierced it. I wonder what the fix would be. I'm not a judge. I would just call a judge there.
So basically, my understanding of the rules is that you both players should have some amount of responsibility for noting
Mhm.
mana floating in a mana pool.
Right.
So it is legal for Joseph to overtap for a spell, but he
Mhm.
should say, he in theory he should announce that he's floating a mana, or
Mhm.
Gabriel should point out that he has overpaid and or is floating a mana. But I've also spoken to judges about this, and the rules have changed over the years, and different
Mhm.
judges have different approaches to precisely how they rule it. But something to
Mhm.
watch out for, and I think the lesson is if you see something done incorrectly in that way, you probably should not just let it slide.
Yeah, I think there wasn't really any malicious intent or anything. I think Joseph just tapped five lands because he thought it cost five.
Yeah,
You
of
know.
course. We just have word that this match has gone to time, so we're now in extra turns, but we're
And
not going
then
to need him.
yeah, lava spike to the dome. Um, I think Blood Moon was very, very good that game, despite Joseph having the planes out. But more importantly, I think it was just that DRC went unanswered and dealt like 15 damage.
Yeah, really cool match to watch. I think that was just like illustrative of how the matchup can play out. And my main takeaway is that it really wasn't the counter spells that seemed to
Mhm.
be Gabriel's most important weapons. It was more of Blood Moon for one
Right.
was amazing, and then also just having the pressure and you know doing the doing what Murktide does.